You work for 40 years, you show up on time, you skip vacations, you eat lunch at your desk so often that the crumbs between your keyboard keys could feed a small village. And at the end of all of it, someone hands you a sheet cake from the grocery store, a card signed by people whose names you barely recognized, and a retirement account that may or may not be enough to keep you alive. That account has a name, the 401k, and there's a very good chance that nobody ever properly explained to you what it actually is, how it actually works, or why it was never supposed to be your entire retirement plan in the first place. I'm Gerald. I retired at 62, and I'm going to walk you through this thing the way someone should have walked me through it 35 years ago. So, what is a 401k? Think of it like a three-way deal between you, your employer, and the United States government. You agree to set aside a portion of every paycheck before taxes hit it. Your employer, if they're feeling generous, throws in some extra money on top of yours. And the government agrees not to tax any of it until decades later, when you finally pull it out in retirement. That's the basic trade. You sacrifice spending money today in exchange for a larger pile of money when you're older, slower, and the highlight of your week is a 4 o'clock dinner reservation at the Italian place down the street. The money doesn't just sit in a bank vault somewhere collecting dust. It gets invested. Stocks, bonds, mutual funds, target date funds. The options depend on whatever investment plan your employer set up with their brokerage firm. You pick from a menu the way you'd pick a combo meal at a restaurant, except the consequences of your choice last 30 years instead of 30 minutes. And the whole time your money sits in those investments, it grows, or shrinks, or grows again. The stock market is not a straight line on a chart. It zigs and zags and occasionally falls off a cliff. But over long stretches of time, historically, it trends upward. So that's the simple version. A tax-advantaged savings account tied to your job where money goes in before taxes, grows through investments, and gets taxed when you take it out in retirement. But the simple version leaves out almost everything that matters. So let's go deeper. Before the 401k existed, Americans who worked at factories and offices and corporations retired on something called a pension, a defined benefit plan. You worked for a company like General Motors or United States Steel for 25 or 30 years. When you retired, that company paid you a monthly check for the rest of your life. You didn't pick investments. You didn't manage a portfolio. You didn't stare at a brokerage statement at 2 in the morning wondering if your retirement just evaporated because a bank in Europe did something stupid. You just showed up, did the work, and the company took care of the rest. The risk was on the employer's balance sheet. If the stock market crashed, that was their problem, not yours. Then came 1978. Congress passed the Revenue Act, and buried deep in that legislation was a small provision, Section 401, subsection K, of the Internal Revenue Code. It was originally meant to deal with a narrow issue around executive compensation and deferred bonuses. Nobody in Washington thought much of it, just another paragraph in a tax code thick enough to stop a bullet. For 2 years, it sat there in the Internal Revenue Code, unnoticed, unremarkable, a footnote in a document that filled entire bookshelves. Then a benefits consultant in Pennsylvania named Ted Benna read that provision on a quiet Saturday afternoon in September of 1979, and he had an idea. What if this obscure little subsection could be used to let regular employees, not just executives, defer part of their salary into a tax-sheltered retirement account? He designed the first 401k savings plan in 1980, tested it at his own consulting firm in suburban Philadelphia, and by the end of 1981, the Internal Revenue Service issued regulations that opened the door for every company in America to do the same thing. And here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Companies loved this. They loved it because a 401k shifted the entire financial risk of retirement from the employer to the employee. No more guaranteed monthly pension checks stretching out for decades on the shoe. Corporate balance sheet. No more actuaries trying to predict how long retirees would live and how much it would cost. Instead, the company could offer a small match on employee contributions, chip in a few percentage points of salary, and walk away from the retirement business entirely. By the mid-1980s, pensions started disappearing across the American corporate landscape. Not overnight, slowly, like a tide going out. And by 2024, only about 15% of private sector workers in the United States had access to a traditional defined benefit pension. Ted Benna himself said years later that the 401k was never designed to replace pensions. It was supposed to be a supplement, an extra savings vehicle on top of the pension you already had. But corporations saw an exit door from expensive pension obligations, and they walked through it without looking back. So now you're in charge, and the details of how this system works will either make you wealthy or leave you eating canned soup in a studio apartment at 74. In 2026, you can contribute up to $24,500 of your own salary into a 401k. That money comes out of your paycheck before income taxes are calculated, which means every dollar you contribute lowers your taxable income for that year. If you're 50 or older, there's a catch-up provision. You can throw in an additional $8,000 on top of the standard limit, bringing your total personal contribution to $32,500. And if you happen to be between 60 and 63 years old, the Secure 2.0 Act created something called the Super Catch-up, an extra $11,250 instead of the regular $8,000 for a maximum personal contribution of $35,750 per year. Those catch-up numbers exist because lawmakers in Washington eventually realized that a lot of people spend their 20s and 30s paying off student loans and mortgages and raising children and don't start seriously saving for retirement until their hair is already going gray. The super catch-up gives you a narrow 4-year window to make up for lost time, right before the standard catch-up amount drops back down at 64. Now let's talk about the employer match, because this is the part I wish someone had tattooed on my forearm the day I started my first real job at 28 years old. If your employer offers to match your 401k contributions and you don't contribute enough to capture the full match, you're turning down free money. You are literally handing back part of your compensation package and telling your employer to keep it. A common match structure at a mid-sized American company works like this. Your employer matches 100% of the first 3% of your salary that you contribute and 50% of the next 2%. On a $100,000 salary, that's $4,000 in free employer money if you contribute at least 5%. Skip it, and that $4,000 goes right back into your company's operating budget. They don't lose a minute of sleep over it. According to Fidelity's data from the end of 2025, 88% of 401k participants receive some form of employer match. The average total savings rate, combining employee contributions and employer match, hit 14.2%. But only about 14% of workers actually max out their own $24,500 contribution limit. The rest leave room on the table. Between your own contributions and your employer's, the total amount going into your 401k in any given year can't exceed $72,000 in 2026. For the vast majority of working Americans, that ceiling is purely theoretical. You need a very generous employer contribution on top of your own maximum to get anywhere near it. If you're finding this helpful so far, hit subscribe. I cover money, retirement, and the financial traps nobody warns you about until it's almost too late. Now let's talk about the Roth option, because this is where it gets interesting. A traditional 401k takes your money in before taxes and taxes you later when you withdraw it in retirement. A Roth 401k takes your money in after you've already paid income taxes on it, and then everything you pull out in retirement, including decades of investment growth, comes out completely tax-free. The question is whether you think your tax rate will be higher today while you're still working, or later when you're retired and drawing down savings. If you're in your peak earning years and sitting in a high tax bracket, the traditional 401k might save you more. If you're younger or in a lower bracket, the Roth option could save you a fortune over the long run because all that growth comes out untouched by the Internal Revenue Service. There's no universally correct answer between traditional and Roth. Anyone who tells you there is should probably not be managing your money. And starting in 2026, there's a new wrinkle. If you earned over $150,000 in the prior year on your W-2 and you're over 50, your catch-up contributions now must go into a Roth account. You don't get the choice anymore. Congress decided for you. You'll pay taxes on those dollars now, but the growth and eventual withdrawals will be completely tax-free. Whether that's a gift or a punishment depends entirely on who you ask. Now we need to talk about fees, because this is the silent killer inside your 401k account that almost nobody pays attention to. Every 401k plan charges fees. Administrative fees for running the plan. Fund expense ratios on each investment option. Sometimes advisory fees layered on top of everything else. And you probably never notice any of them because they're expressed as tiny percentages on a disclosure document you never opened. 0.5%, 1.2%. Sounds completely harmless. It is not harmless. A 1% annual fee on a portfolio that could have grown to $1.8 million over a 40-year career will consume roughly $590,000 of your returns. That number is not a typo. Compound interest works in both directions. It grows your money over time, and it grows the fees you're paying on that money over the exact same time. Your employer is legally required to provide a fee disclosure document for your 401k plan. It exists somewhere in your benefits paperwork or your company's human resources portal. If you've never read it, you are in very large company. Almost nobody reads it, but you should. Now let's talk about what happens when you try to take money out of a 401k before retirement, because the system has teeth. Before age 59 and a half, if you withdraw money from a traditional 401k, you pay full income taxes on the entire amount you take out, plus a 10% early withdrawal penalty on top of that. There are limited hardship exceptions for things like medical emergencies, certain disability situations, and a few other narrow cases. But the system is fundamentally designed to discourage you from touching that money before retirement. And on the other end of the timeline, starting at age 73, you must begin taking required minimum distributions. The government shorthand is RMDs. The logic is simple. Washington let you defer those income taxes for decades. Now they want their cut. Every year after 73, the IRS calculates a minimum amount you're required to withdraw based on your account balance and life expectancy tables. If you don't take enough out, the penalty used to be brutal at 50%. It was recently reduced to 25%, which is still enough to make your stomach drop. And RMDs don't just affect your tax bracket. Large required distributions can push your income above thresholds that trigger Medicare premium surcharges, known as IRMAA. A retiree in the 22% federal bracket who accidentally crosses an IRMAE threshold can face a combined effective rate approaching 40% on those extra dollars. The system connects in ways that nobody explains to you until it's too late. There's also the problem of what happens every time you change jobs. The average American worker changes jobs about 12 times during a career. Every time you leave an employer, you face a decision about the 401k you're leaving behind. You can roll the old balance into your new employer's plan. You can roll it into an individual retirement account, an IRA. You can leave it sitting where it is at your former employer, or you can cash it out. Cashing it out is almost always the wrong decision. You'll lose somewhere between 20 and 30% of the balance immediately, between income, taxes, and the early withdrawal penalty. But research shows that roughly 40% of workers cash out their 401k when they switch jobs, especially younger workers under 40 with smaller balances who figure it's not that much money anyway. Thousands of dollars vaporized for no reason other than nobody sat them down and explained the alternatives and what that money would have been worth in 30 years. And that brings us to the big uncomfortable truth sitting underneath all of this. The average 401k balance in America, across all age groups, is about $146,000, according to Fidelity's year-end 2025 data. The median balance is $34,400. That means half of all 401k participants in the country have less than $34,400 saved for retirement. For people in their 60s who are approaching retirement age, the average balance climbs to around $573,000. The median for that same age group sits near $210,000. And the number that Americans say they believe they need to retire comfortably, according to Northwestern Mutual's 2026 planning survey, $1.46 million. That gap between what people have and what they think they need is not small. That gap is the reason that 64% of Americans say they are more afraid of running out of money in retirement than they are of dying. Let that arithmetic sit with you for a moment. I retired at 62. I did some things right with my 401k over the years, and I did some things wrong. I started contributing too late. I didn't understand how fees worked until I was in my 50s and read an article that made my stomach hurt. And I cashed out a small 401k balance in my early 30s when I left a job because I wanted a new car. That car was a blue sedan that lasted 6 years before the transmission gave out in a grocery store parking lot. The money I pulled out of that retirement account to buy it would have been worth over $90,000 by the time I actually retired. I think about that car sometimes. The 401k is not a perfect system. It was a tax loophole noticed by a curious consultant on a Saturday afternoon that became a retirement plan that became the only retirement plan for the vast majority of working Americans. It puts the burden of investment decisions on people who were never trained to make investment decisions. It charges fees that hide in documents almost nobody reads, and it replaced a system where your employer guaranteed your income in old age with a system where the performance of the stock market decides whether you eat well or eat carefully. But it's what we have. And if you understand how it works, if you contribute enough to capture the full employer match, if you keep your fees as low as possible, if you don't cash out every time you switch jobs, and if you start early enough for compound interest to do the heavy lifting over decades, it can still work. It has worked for millions of people. It worked well enough for me. The 401k was never designed to carry your entire retirement by itself. It was meant to be one leg of a three-legged stool, alongside Social Security and personal savings. Two of those three legs are wobbling, so take care of the one you can control. If this helped you understand something that should have been explained to you decades ago, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.